Hey, everybody. I'll give you the connect sound. Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1268th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the great pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Ambera Wellmann and Ksenia M. Soboleva. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Ambera Wellmann was born in 1982 in Nova Scotia, Canada, and lives and works in New York. Wellmann's recent exhibitions include the ones at Company Gallery in Hauser and Wirth that are going to be talked about today. Wellmann's work accrues through what she has described as a visual version of catachresis, the process in which a word is deliberately deployed incorrectly. Her painterly catachresis manifests through irrational pictorial space and the depiction of an indeterminate number of bodies, genders, species, all without any predetermined visual hierarchy. And our host today, Dr. Ksenia M. Soboleva, is a New York-based writer and art historian specializing in queer art and culture. She holds a PhD from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU. Her writings have appeared in The Rail, in Bomb, Ursula Mag, Cultured, Freeze, as well as numerous exhibition catalogs and artist monographs. Soboleva practices an autobiographical approach to art history and an art historical approach to autobiography. She's currently completing her book manuscript, What Happens After Art, AIDS, and Lesbian Histories, and teaches at NYU. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ksenia to get us started.
Thank you so much, Chloe, and thank you to everyone on Brooklyn Rail for making this possible. And thank you so much to Ambra for joining me today. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. And of course, massive congratulations on two stunning exhibitions. And we can actually just start a slideshow now so that everyone can see. And hopefully, most of you have seen the shows. And if not, here's a little preview. And of course, everyone should go and see the shows after. So the exhibitions are very much in dialogue with each other. And what emerged for me seeing these two shows was an allegorical memento mori of all of our present crises, the climate crisis, the political crisis, the crisis of identity, both individual and collective. And in your paintings, Ambra, I see identity dissolving, and I also see a disillusionment with identity and this notion that identity functions as a connective tissue at all. And you know, your work has been situated within a lineage of queer artists queering art history, right? So someone like Luz Fertino queering Picasso, or Nicole Eisenman queering Renoir with the beer gardens, or Deb Cass queering Andy Warhol. Not that he needs that much queering, but you know, you participate in this project, in this very queer project of not dismissing art history, but taking from art history what works for you. And you've revisited artists like Hieronymus Bosch or Courbet in this show, who I hope we'll talk about more in a second. And to me, what really permeates these shows is a revisiting and reanimating of the memento mori tradition. Death, as you can all see, reappears across the different paintings and the mural at Company through skulls, skeletons, the fish, which is a symbol of rapid decay. And but death is not in your work, death is not presented as a passive symbol, but as an active agent, right? And I found which is inherently a surrealist impulse, right? Death anthropomorphized, death animated, death as something that is alive. And I found myself thinking, what is what is the counterpart to death being presented as alive? How do we present something that is alive as dead? And then I realized that, of course, it's the same image. The animated the animated body of death is the corpse of the living. So I wanted to begin by asking you, how did death become such an insistent presence in this body of work, and whether that was something conscious or if it kind of emerged in hindsight?
Wow. I thank you for all those observations. It was conscious, and things have a way of sort of creeping into my work gradually over time. And I think for the past 2 years, skeletons started to figure more prominently in my work over a few paintings, not just the ones included in this show, but I had started to experience this kind of low-key frustration with figuration and with queer figuration, in the sense that it seemed rooted in a kind of essentializing and limited context of domesticity and sex. And I'm also very interested in those things as well, but I had actually started this entire exhibition with the kind of absurd goal of not painting figures at all. And very quickly you sort of realized that it was impossible for me, and that it was very hard for me to even start a painting without painting figures. But death kind of entered into the picture, where the idea of queer futurity and the idea of queerness as like the not yet here, the about to be, in a sense of potentiality and becoming, was always interesting to me. But I felt as though it didn't necessarily embrace the complexities of the present and the urgency of the present that we're experiencing right now. And so I wanted this work to be more confrontational with our present, more or less, and which is overwhelmed by death, which is overwhelmed by disaster, genocide, the climate crisis. Like there's so much on our doorstep right now, and it honestly seemed impossible not to confront these subjects, and that to not paint death in some sense felt avoidant in a way. So it wasn't even necessarily, well, it was a conscious decision, but it was also like an inevitability, I would say. And yeah.
No, please.
I'm done.
Yes, and that makes me think of particularly the painting of the ram. I mean, there's a few paintings that I would love to linger on, but Chloe, if we could go to the ram, it's a painting of a ram that, if you look closely, it impales itself with its own horn. And it was the work was discussed in the New York Times profile on you, and the writer was talking about how, you weren't quite happy with this, and so you put it away, and then you pulled it back out. And there is this this idea that we're killing ourselves, right? But at the same time, there is that ancient symbol of the serpent that's devouring its own tail, right? Which, it's both an image of self-destruction and also self-generation. So again, this notion comes forward of death and life collapsing, right? And I'm curious how you thought about that in this painting. Is that logic at play here, or is it really, is this just about, or not just, nothing is just about something, but is it leading with self-destruction, or is there room for self-generation here?
Yeah, there's definitely room for both. And I had stumbled across an image of a ram whose horn had impaled itself, and it was such a compelling image. And I didn't end up using it as a direct like image reference for this painting. This painting has actually the body of the ram in this painting is the body of a young lamb.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a child body with an adult head, and that might not necessarily be evident in the final painting, but it was important to also, for me, think about this sort of masculinized symbol of the ram, this symbol of, Aries, of war, of destruction, of strength, and how it turns on itself more or less. But that, I think, one of the important parts of this painting is that the ram has this also intense vulnerability, and I wanted to naturalize the idea of self-destruction in the body of the ram, and to naturalize it with a symbol from nature is important, because it's obviously like a difficult topic to approach and use, a human form. So it was important to use this sort of naturalized symbol, but also, the ram is a symbol of substitution and provision and life-saving as well. And it's interesting to conflate that with this idea of death. And I wanted a moment in the show where tragedy was kind of literalized or metaphorized in a strong and very sort of deliberate way. I didn't want to kind of dance around the subject. And it proved to be a very difficult painting to make. And as you can see in the work in progress images, I had several different attempts. And this was sort of, I don't know if you can hear my dog barking or not, but can
It's
you?
sweet. Yeah, you can.
Okay, it's
It
sweet.
adds something,
Well,
definitely.
stop being sweet. Sorry about that. Yeah, I had read this quote that tragedy is the union of the human and the divine in the form of monstrosity. And there's something very monstrous about this ram. And there's something very tragic about it. And whenever I'm painting, I don't want to ever limit the painting to a singular reading. I think painting is at its strongest when it can live in, and two things can be true, or it can live in multiple ideas at once. So I also think that there are other elements that are difficult to tell from reference, like from on-screen images, but there's like a sense of thick impasto around this ram. And I had been thinking about Botticelli's Spring. Like when you see Botticelli's Spring in person, the paint is actually applied in such a thick way that it's almost like sculptural low relief, that the paint is like rising off of the canvas in this thick, opaque, super beautiful way. And I find that there's a generative and like life-giving atmosphere around the ram in this painting. There are mice sort of leaping through this field. There's, things coming to life while one thing is clearly dying. But it also, when you look at the work in progress images, it's also, it was, the horizon line was so straight across the top, and the head of the ram as well in previous iterations was so painfully cartoony and so underdeveloped in a sense. And as I started to work on the painting, it needed a kind of like it needed to be oriented in space in such a way that it's like, this is a funny painting because you're sort of looking at the ram simultaneously from the side and from above, and also in a tilted perspective. So there's this kind of sort of all-seeing spiritual perspective that I think redeems the painting from being simply tragic.
And I love that that accumulation of paint that's like hinting at what's underneath. That sort of crustiness I find extremely satisfying, and it's so wonderful looking at these images of the work in progress. And I'm wondering if we could go to the painting Widening Gyre. That was somehow it was the painting that really resonated with me. I found myself looking at it for a long time, and I keep thinking about it as The Fisherman, and I had to look up what the title was, and
Hmm.
I thought Whiting Gyre, and I was actually going to ask you, is that a Yeats reference?
Uh, yes, it came from a poem.
Yeah.
My friend Rachel gave me the title. She was like, "What about what?" My friends are glorious title givers. Rachel
Because
gave me that title.
it's a really apocalyptic poem, it's that poem
Yeah.
basically speaks to a world slipping into chaos.
Hmm.
And which again resonates with all of the crises that we're facing, and also the fish are prominently featured in
Hmm.
this painting. And I have little investment in biological family structures, but I have a lot of investment in my students, and I often think about the world that they're inheriting. And, the now late Jane Goodall said something to the effect of, how appalling that the supposedly smartest species are literally destroying our own living environment, like fish poisoning our tank. And which brings me to ask, there is so much symbolism in your work. Um, can we talk about the symbolism of the fish? Because
Hmm.
historically, in Western iconography, it's a symbol for Christ, and then in Dutch still life, it appears as a memento mori, right? The quick decay of the fish.
Hmm.
Um, what what do fish mean for you?
I grew up in, Nova Scotia, and the men in my family work on the boats. My father was an engineer on a boat, and my little brother is a cook, was a cook on like a scallop boat, and a lot of my friends went into the fishing industry, and so it's close to home, and I watched that industry decline slowly as I grew up. And Nova Scotia is sort of famous for the declining cod industry. We had a kind of Nova Scotia heritage commercial on television when we were growing up, where cod were so plentiful in the ocean at one point that they would quite literally jump into the boat, and they're through overfishing, it almost disappeared. So there's like a personal connection to fish, but I also have read that fish kind of represent the origin of the world.
Mm.
And I think like fish speak to this feeling of scarcity, of cyclical exhaustion, and they're if they do symbolize this sort of origin of the world, it's, when they appear as dead or depleted in paintings, it's like, what happens when the origin of life has died out? And the fisherman is sort of the oldest job in the world, one of the oldest jobs in the world, one of the oldest laborers. And I think it's like interesting to portray this person who has, in some sense, sort of created their own, not demise, but sort of, yeah, threatened to obliterate themselves. And fish, like the fish in this painting, were painted over and over and over again. I can be a bit neurotic. I am neurotic when I'm painting, and I will make the same mistake over and over and over again and hope for different results, basically. And in this work, the fish were painted and repainted and sanded off, so much so that the fish became indelibly and permanently sort of inked onto the canvas, like they couldn't be erased. And so the fish in this painting started to become really interesting to me as this granular, um, ghostly presence. And eraser has sort of figured prominently in my work in the past, and in this case it was sort of like this moment where the fish were sort of scarred into the canvas, and their their absence in it was completely permanent. And it just, yeah, it just sort of intuitively came. And it was initially going to be this sort of like herd of black cats fighting over this pile of fish scraps, and I ended up adding the fisherman at the very end, and the waves that you see in the background, which I'm still so many things I'm learning how to paint, and I can't paint a wave worth a damn. So I gave up on those waves and turned them into clouds. So like oftentimes in my paintings, something like a failed attempt at painting something will be repurposed into a
Yeah.
different subject. And when it's repurposed that way, it becomes really interesting. So the waves became clouds in this painting. And I also loved that this painting has the sensation of wind.
Mhm.
Like I wanted, if there was an element running through the Hauser exhibition, it's wind.
Mm.
And I wanted, that sense of wind to kind of permeate all the paintings in the show in some way.
That's so very lesbian. That makes me think of, Portrait of a Lady on Fire. At some point, there was an SNL skit, and it's like the Oscar goes to the main character of Portrait of a Lady on Fire, the wind. It's
Oh
such a
shit.
problem. No, I love it.
Yeah.
But also, clouds turn into waves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is also, I think, a nice so wonderful learning all this about this piece, by the way, and seeing the in progress images. And maybe this is a nice segue into the other piece in the Hauser show that I wanted to highlight, which is Death Masks Eternity, which can be interpreted in two ways, right? Death
Mm-hmm.
Masks Eternity or Death Masks Eternity,
Mm-hmm.
which is in this piece, you are referencing Courbet's burial at Ornans,
Mm-hmm.
which we have an image of as well. And, that was a work that was deeply controversial at the time that he painted it because it was depicting common people on monumental scale that was traditionally reserved for history painting. And, he's basically arguing that the death of a peasant is just as important as the death of a king, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, well, first I'm wondering what made you turn to Courbet's painting, and then in your version, whose death is being depicted? Is it the death of the planet, the Earth itself? Who are we? Who are we mourning?
We don't know who we're mourning in this painting. And there is a small bird in the, off to the, like, just underneath this kind of burial zone. And the bird was the first thing that went into this painting. I sometimes start a painting with like a singular thing just placed somewhere and sort of build a painting not randomly, but it will be like just the way to start the painting, the way to confront such a huge empty space. So we don't necessarily know who the burial is for. The grave at the center of the painting is a kind of like structural equivalent to emptiness. And one of the things that I loved about Courbet's painting is that it provides like a structure for beholding. And the way that painting undulates sort of from left to right. I was reading this Michael Fried essay, and he devotes all his time to researching this painting. He goes to the place where he goes to the actual physical landscapes where like Courbet painted his only landscapes, and writes this incredible chapter about the procession and the idea of the snaking eye in and out of the landscape of that painting, and creating an undulating kind of wavelength for the eye that keeps you in the painting forever. And I knew that I wanted to have a painting of a funeral in the show, and I knew that I wanted it to take place in snow. And the other thing that drew me to Courbet's burial is that he moved decisively away from romanticism in that moment and created a kind of bleak and objective, like you said, portrayal of people, and also moved away from individuals and depicted society. Like this was a moment where he portrayed people together in grief. And with this painting, ex-wife and I were having this conversation about like the idea that like when we were kids, we're like, yeah, we're alive and one day we'll die. And that in more recent times, it feels like death is moving towards us, that death is like coming for us. And that's this feeling brought about by the climate crisis. And I wanted to sort of metaphorize that with the appearance of the Death Knight from the Rider-Waite Tarot in the left-hand side of the composition.
Mm-hmm.
And I had also, you can see from the work in progress that I had started to paint faces, the faces of the mourners, and encountered this problem where I thought, I don't want to paint mourners. I don't want to paint emotion. And because you never see people like laughing and you never see people crying in contemporary art. Not so much in contemporary painting. And it's because it's such a, for me, it's such a forceful and illustrative gesture in painting. And at this point in preparing the show as well, I was really trying to move away oddly from figuration and wanted the gesture of covering their faces with masks to perform this like elimination of identity and focus on like collective grief instead. And the hands in the painting, I think, take on the role of what an emoting face might do, which is to sort of, I don't know, the hands are like wrung in kind of anxiety or complacency or grief or self-soothing. And the hands are actually at eye level in the exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
But
Go ahead.
yeah.
And also your decision to situate it in such a snowy landscape. And, you know, I think this is something that you and I share, is that we grew up with a lot of snow. And
Mm-hmm.
now, unless you seek it out, it's certainly not in New York. I remember when I first moved here 13 years ago, my first winter, it
Yeah.
was as almost as cold as it had been in Russia. And there was so
Wow.
much snow. And these days it's just, you know, I have this nostalgia for snow. And sometimes I hear my students saying like, oh, I went here and it was the first time I saw snow. Or some when it snows here, they'll be like, oh, I'm from California, I've never seen snow
Mm-hmm.
before. And it's just, it's so shocking to me to have grown up without snow.
Mm-hmm. It's
Yeah.
shocking. When I grew up, I think like 4 or 5 feet of snow could accumulate on the ground in Nova Scotia. We always had snow, and it barely snows there anymore. And I mean, I wanted winter is this time of pause. Like, you know, the idea of situating the painting in the middle of winter is this, it's like a time of pause. Everything's in hibernation. It's a time of expectancy. Um, and snow as well, it kind of blankets and disguises and erases everything, so that you can experience things anew and experience them fresh. And so it provides, snow kind of allegorizes or performs like what painting does, which is to provide a temporary space to kind of consider. And you know, snow also, there are things buried in this painting. Inside this void at the painting center, there is like a slight indication of a body, like in foreshortened perspective. And but it's like the painting is sort of asking the viewer to, you know, be included in this moment of contemplation or grief, or just a moment of pause and observing. And yeah, a moment of like intimacy with the alienated body kind of thing. So
And there's always also actually looking at it now, you know, because I remember seeing it in person, and it was striking that I couldn't tell whether the person on the left was emerging from the horse or being crushed by the horse. And now that I'm looking at it, it actually it makes me think of that there is that Bruegel painting um that I think it may be titled The Fall of Icarus, but basically Icarus, you see the fall of Icarus,
mm-hmm.
and then there is a plowman, um, in the landscape, and he's turned away from the fall. And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of a larger commentary on how we often turn away from crisis. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we turn away in order to process it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we're just oblivious to it. So looking at it now, it's interesting because there actually is this catastrophe happening in the painting, but
Mm-hmm.
everyone is turned away from it.
Completely, yeah.
They're mourning an empty space.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. The figure lying on the ground is also a reference to the death tarot cards, where a man
Mm.
is depicted underneath this marching horse, and the horse is literally stepping over it.
Wow.
And it's interesting to have the only appearance of like a dead person be more or less completely ignored by the funeral procession in this painting. And
Mm.
it's more about a contemplation of the void, or like a confrontation with the present. I'm always struggling with the idea of like, what can painting actually do? And I think all artists encounter this sort of existential struggle about what can it actually affect, what can it change, can it, and I don't know if I think it can change the past. I think it can sort of try and anticipate the future, but I think that with this painting, what I wanted was like to emphasize how important it is to just experience the present, like not to change the present, but just to experience it. And just, I think that, yeah, and in this case, maybe the present is a void. So like,
Yeah, and
but yeah.
offering, and writers struggle with this too, but offering
Mm-hmm.
it offers, you said earlier something along the lines of offering a space for contemplation, right? Offering
Mm-hmm.
a space of reflection, and museums and art spaces, when done well, they have sort of become the new temples, right? In our
Yeah.
secular society,
Mm-hmm.
it is where we go to reflect on life. And
Mm-hmm.
ideally, the artist is assisting us in offering something to us that we may not have considered, or we may not have taken the time to, sit down and consider something for an hour in our very busy lives in New York City. So, I think it does a great deal. And yeah. Perhaps we can move to, I'm just looking at the time. Perhaps we can move to some of the works in the company gallery show, because I also want to talk about the mural and the kind of collage-like installation, and return to what you said about queer figuration, and you spoke about it in the wonderful profile piece, cultured piece that the one and only Johanna Fateman did, and you said that you've experienced this, oversaturation of queer figuration, and I think those of us who have been paying attention over the last 5 years in particular, there has been this reinvestment from the art market in queer artists making figurative work that is legibly queer, um, but at times feels very safe, or
Mm-hmm.
feels like there is a kind of, yes, there's sex, but there is a sanitization
Mm-hmm.
of the kind of sex that we're having. And queer identity in some of those works feels like um, it's like paradoxically fixed, right? It doesn't actually allow enough room for fluidity, for tension, for failure.
Mm-hmm.
And that relates back to, what I'm seeing in your work is very much this disillusionment with identity as something that functions as a cohesive connective tissue. And I feel that in these shows you are, almost consciously withholding a kind of representation that has come to be expected. And I want to focus on the word present in representation, because nobody in these paintings feels that present,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is reflective of, something that we spoke about earlier, a kind of social exhaustion, the
Mm-hmm.
pervasiveness of burnout. And there is this sense of withdrawal, right? Figures literally withdrawing from the pictorial space.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, the thing to me that has the most presence and appears to be the most realistic is the mannequin head.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, you know, the plastic object that you photographed um, that appears in the collage like wall installation at
Mm-hmm.
company. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and also just the process of making this mural at company gallery, which I know took 9 days to make.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, this mannequin. Wait, let me grab her. She's right here.
Oh, great, she's
I
coming.
have her handy. Yeah, there
Mm,
she is.
hello.
She was given to me by my dear friend Raul de Nieves when I was working on a Halloween costume, and I think she's an older kind of mannequin, but I sort of got obsessed with her appearance and um, you know, would take photographs of it from time to time, and just thought like I want to paint her. She appears in a couple of different paintings, some not in this specific exhibition, but I've painted her a few different times. And she has this kind of like smug, kind of nasty expression on her face that I love. And so I will often just, you know, sometimes for me the best way to start a painting is just to paint something that I'm just visually interested in without necessarily knowing why. I think there's a lot of paintings that start without knowing why, and I just trust that process. And so I had painted her. She appears on the left hand side of the canvas, and this composition became very additive. So I added this second figure to the right of her, which was this guy sort of doing a muscle pose in the mirror. And it's interesting because when you and I talked previously, you mentioned this Leonora Carrington painting of Dagobert. What was
Yeah,
his
the
name?
Doubt of Dagobert. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, The Doubt of Dagobert. And what's interesting about that painting, if anyone knows it, is that it's sort of this conflation of like patriarchy with a bit of like female insanity.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that this, you know, what I love about this painting of the mannequin is that, and the sort of collage that explodes behind it is that it's a bit insane. And it's, you know, when I go through I went through my sort of camera roll looking for photos that I had taken of it and found like hundreds that I didn't even realize I had taken over time. I just like, because it lives in my living room and I'll occasionally photograph it, or the light is shining on it in a certain way. Um, and photographs that were taken of it over like several years, you know, in 3 different apartments. And I thought it was this accumulation was like an interesting thing to have explode behind it, this cumulative obsession with this quintessential female object, this like female objectified. And so I had placed those photos on the wall behind it, as well as it was kind of an homage to something that I do in my studio, which is to sometimes put all my reference images or a curation of my reference images all together on the wall, hung around the paintings. I think the last slide on our slideshow has an image of that, but um, I I find it to be a very interesting way to sort of recognize thought patterns and recognize obsession. And what I like about this moment in the installation at company is that it is a bit crazy. It's like, you know, one of my biggest inspirations for the mural was Goya's black paintings. And you know, he was slowly going mad and making those paintings right on the parlor walls of his home. I think they were never really meant to be publicly seen. They were done in the privacy and interior of his parlor. And yeah, I just, so it just, the painting evolved from there. And then, you know, if wind is the sort of element running through the Hauser exhibition, fire is the element that's running through the exhibition at Company Gallery, because I had been reading about the witch hunts in Europe and became really interested in this part of history where you really see the capitalist machine in full force, and how the capitalist logic is sort of embodied in like reproductive law and, you know, all these other things. So
yeah, and all the parallels between, you know, what witches were being prosecuted for versus what queer people are being prosecuted for, right?
yeah.
And I read somewhere that in your childhood home, I think your mother had a postcard of Goya's Saturn devouring his child on the fridge.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that's yeah, in a way we're all Saturn at this moment. And what was it like to create the mural, to spend 9 days at the gallery? Maybe we can see some more images of that. And also, you know, I did want to bring up Leonora Carrington because I see that persistence of surrealism throughout your work. You know, these hybrid figures, these dreamscapes, and your work sits in this tension between the apocalyptic and the utopian, and that is a tension that I think very much shows up in Carrington's work, and also just in so many medieval paintings, from The Last Judgment to Hieronymus Bosch, right? The Garden of Earthly Delights brings paradise and hell together in the same pictorial space. But I would say that in these two exhibitions, I sense that the work is leaning decidedly apocalyptic, and
Yeah, so it's more hell heavy.
exactly.
Yeah.
And this is going to sound very cheesy, and I'm wondering if we can connect it particularly to the process of, you know, being in the space for 9 days and making the mural. But I wonder if the utopian um lies in the act of painting itself.
Yes, I 100% think that it does.
Right.
I think like surrealism is, you know, it's not necessarily an aesthetic. It's like a desire to reclaim our imagination. And I think we are living in an era where our imaginations are disappearing through capitalist tools. I think AI destroys memory, destroys literally the ability to think. I mean, we're reading about articles about the doom scroll and how it there's this idea of digital dementia, and that Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, their physical brains are smaller because of doom scrolling, that it shrinks the gray matter in our hippocampus. I think that, you know, the energy of surrealism, you know, as a revolutionary philosophy, and to activate and embrace like an ungovernable part of ourselves, which is our internal world and our dream space, and these sort of natural conditions that can resist the expansion of capitalism. I think this is why surrealism is like really is surviving and permeating our practices again, because the idea of logic and materialism and the rationalization of violence is something that is so present in society right now, that to just be imaginative, like just to paint is already like really, really important. And
Yeah.
I also think that like painting is like an embodiment of unalienated humanity. So even if it's bad painting, it's, I don't know, it's an attempt to connect, it's an attempt to think and to do these things. So yeah, I do think that painting itself is it's not utopic, but it reaches towards and emphasizes the
Yeah.
possibility of utopia.
I love that embodiment of alienated humanity. I wrote it down.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I mean surrealism, which the surrealism show that I was at the Met a few years ago, um,
Mm-hmm.
did so beautifully is really demonstrating how surrealism was a movement of political liberation globally.
Mm-hmm.
Globally, artists were turning to surrealism, including Leonora Carrington,
Mm-hmm.
to imagine different futures. And you spoke about the digital, and I think time-wise, probably that will be my last question. But I noted in the New York Times piece, something that stood out to me is that the writer referenced your work as being post-internet. And I'm always like, what does that mean? Like, what does
What
it
does
mean
that mean?
in
Okay, I
relation
don't
to
I
art
don't remember
making?
that part.
Yeah, is it that you're pulling a lot from references that you're finding on the internet? Is it that images appear digital? And, I admit I have to read up on what it actually means. I'm sure it has an established terminology within art, contemporary art history. But, I on the level of my superficial knowledge of what post-internet is, that term really does not do the work justice because
Mm-hmm.
I feel a very IRL, analog, physical engagement in your work with art history.
Mm-hmm.
And as a stuffy art historian, I have to ask, what has your relationship to art history been? Thinking of the postcard on your mother's fridge.
Mm-hmm.
What was the first art class you ever took? Who is the first artist that inspired you, that made you want to become a painter?
Mm.
Let's end by going back.
Okay. Well, you mentioned that Goya postcard that my mom had, and it's such a it was Saturn devouring his son, and it was such a violent painting. And I remember looking at it as a kid, like stealing up to my mom's room and taking it off the dresser and looking at it. And it, there's something about the sun in that painting, like Saturn has bit the head off or is about to. It's this body that's becoming dead. It's not dead yet, it's becoming dead. This moment of transition that's so powerful. And then the desperation. Saturn has this like very complex expression on his face of desperation to finish the task, and this absolute like disgust in doing it. And then it's just brilliantly painted in this way where, like, I think the thing about Goya paintings is that they're rough enough to make anybody feel like they could do it. And as a kid, I felt like I could maybe make something like that. So it was very inspiring. And I grew up in quite a, troubled household with, it was an abusive household, and the art was this respite, and I was a quiet kid, and here was this way to speak. And yeah, Goya has been definitely one of my big important things. But I also, to be honest, when I was a little bit younger in my 20s and doing an exchange semester at Cooper Union in 2010, I went to an exhibition at Pace Gallery with a friend, and we went into this little room.
Mm.
And both of us went into the room and had our backs turned to each other and sort of like in a trance walked over to opposite ends of the wall where this James Turrell
Mm.
installation was. And it was the first time I had ever seen his work, but on opposite walls there was like this projection of light that was changing color very, very slowly, almost imperceptibly. And I didn't know this, but my friend and I were mirroring each other's movements and slowly walking over to the wall with our arms out to touch the light. And when you approach the wall and go to touch it, your arm falls into this kind of abyss. And I just remember this moment, like of absolute presence, being absolutely present with the work, and not thinking about anything but that work in that moment, and feeling like, well, this is what I think the aspiration of art is to just be completely present with it, and with presence of mind, and everything else can flow from there. And honestly, film has also been as influential, like, you know, if like David Lynch has been such a force for my paintings in the way that he messes with time. And I read a quote, like rambling now, but I read a quote about historical painting by Bataille recently that was just about how it creates a wormhole between the past and the present and dissolves time completely. And these are just sort of the powerful capabilities of painting and art that I think I still seek to achieve in my own work.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ksenia.
I'll hand it over to Chloe to open it up for questions.
Ambera and Ksenia, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been such a pleasure to listen to. We have a few audience questions queued up, and if anybody has a question, there's a form in the chat where you can send them to me. This is your chance. The first question is, do you experience any tension, productive or otherwise, in the act of figuring death? To the degree that death remains associated with the absolute limit of knowledge, feeling, experience, is there a tension in the act of not only figuring death, but of employing such a high degree of skill and technique in doing so?
There's the poem that we're going to read at the end of this. There was a beautiful moment when describing her poems that said something like, life is just a prolonged flirtation with death, in the description of Hilda Hilst poems that we're going to read in 1 second. And I think that's very liberating. There is like a tension with the unknown, and I don't know if I don't know if how painting can engage in that tension any differently than the way we engage with it in our life. I don't think the two are almost separable. I think about death all the time, and the older you get, the more you think about it, to be honest. So it's it's something that I think about constantly. And I think that in terms of technique, in my painting, I feel like it's like not about sort of representing things. Painting's about representing like the difference between what something is and what it could be. It's like, that's what I'm going for. That's sort of the tension.
Thank you for that question, audience member, and thanks for that answer, Ambra. The next question is from Amanda. Amanda, I'm going to give you the chance to unmute to ask direct.
Hi, Laura. Thanks
Hi.
for your talk. It was really inspiring and helpful. I actually think we were at the checkout counter at the art store like a couple of days ago, but I wasn't sure if it was you, so I
Yeah,
didn't
I recognize your face.
um, but yeah, your talk was super helpful in helping me like think through some stuff. I'm also working on some paintings addressing violence, and I wanted to ask your thoughts on sort of making imagery that addresses or offers some sort of critique of violence without the reproduction of violence. And not to say like the reproduction of something, you know, like gory or scary, like that's not what I'm getting at. I'm sort of getting at like creating a sort of insensitive image that exists like violently as like an object image in the world that maybe it's something that, you know, doesn't accomplish the goal of, you know, offering a critique of violence. Which I think your work actually like totally dodges that. And I was moved at the show at how you're able to do that. So I wanted to ask if you know, what decisions you made to sort of get around that issue, and if there were any, you know, historical or contemporary painters that you were looking at who you felt like did this successfully, and sort of what were you able to take from them?
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because we've witnessed so much violence in recent years, and in my opinion, we cannot paint that atrocity. Like, we cannot paint a genocide. Painting becomes violent when it's exploitative in that sense. So what do you do? I mean, you can paint like the monstrous. I especially think in the way the world is so violent towards women is it's extremely disturbing to me right now, like what's happened in policy making over the past few years. And it's something you have to negotiate. And you know, my ex-wife got me into watching a lot of anime, and the thing that I notice a lot happening in anime is that they that, you know, in order to defeat a monster, you have to become a monster yourself. Like, you have to embrace your own monstrosity. And I think this is like I don't know, an entry point of some kind. And like, you know, Francis Bacon said, don't paint the horror, paint the scream. Deleuze says, you know, paint the force itself, the force upon things, and not the things themselves. Paint them as they are, subjected to a sense of force. There's all kinds of ways around it without exploitation, but it's like, yeah, it's a slippery slope. And I also have felt like, I don't know, I had a conversation with Margot Norton in my studio years ago where I wanted to embrace violence in my work in a way, but I'm still figuring it out, to be honest. And the artists that I look to, I mean Nicole Eisenman is like the goat of all goats. She's so amazing. And I went to go see her exhibition in Chicago over, like, I guess it was a while ago, almost like last September or something, like way back, 2 Septembers ago. And you know, she's painted very violent imagery with such a delicate hand, and she's such a courageous painter, the way she tackles subjects and things. So like, I look up to her a lot, actually. And it's kind of always amazing to discover more and more of her work and realize how much she's actually done. She's incredible.
Yeah, what you said about like sort of becoming the monster to like defeat the monster, or also what you said about like painting the force that enacts it, kind of makes me think of like, maybe it helps me to rethink like Gustin's work or like Gollop's work, where like Gustin does the thing where he like sees himself in the hooded men, and that was his way of sort of, I guess, subconsciously admitting that like his role as like a painter can be evil, or like seeing that. Like he identified with those masked figures, and that's why he painted them painting, or painted them doing things that he would do. And then I guess like Golub's like political portraits of, you know, dictators, revolutionaries, like national leaders, sort of focuses on,
Yeah, there's a
people who are
really,
positions.
really great. Oh, sorry, my thing is glitching. I think I interrupted you. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying that I think that it, you know, he, through his political portraits, he sort of gets at all of the violence that's enacted or sort of initiated by men in positions of power without depicting the actual violence, maybe focused on the image of the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a great line in a poem by Frank O'Hara where he says, "The eagerness of objects to be what we are afraid to do." And I think this is a really nice way to think about the ability of painting or art to perform in the world in a way that isn't violent, that otherwise would be directly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for those questions. And thank you, Ambera, for those answers. We have a few more questions if you'll have them. The next question is from Neil. Neil asks, I like the seeming insistence of flatness in your work. It reminds me of Sienese painting and the compression of narrative that doesn't care about proper perspective or scale. The wall's relationship to the paintings doubles that flatness. Can you talk about the importance of flatness, how you think that it actually opens up in the content of your work?
Think about this. The flatness, I think, that you see in some of my works is the final move in the painting. And this is this sort of space that is enforced around the bodies. Like the flatness in the space around the bodies is usually the last thing. It's like the last decision, and it's the last thing that determines their silhouette and contour. And the works on the wall are, there was a lot of like, I didn't plan this mural. It was sort of very much like spontaneous, very one day at a time, and an additive process. But I knew that I wanted the works to be sort of just like frontal. I didn't want to play with perspective or space on the mural. I wanted it to be very sort of straightforward frontal work, because I had been looking at all these pieces of propaganda from the Middle Ages, and early sort of woodcuts and illustrations that just very straightforwardly represented space. And so some of the wall illustrations are a reference to that sort of source. But flatness is like, it's a system that allows other things in the painting to help realize themselves. Things like flatness doesn't just exist in its own sense, it exists in relationship to very voluminous and very articulated and realized objects and people in the painting. So it's there to sort of facilitate those things. I don't know if that answers your question, but
I have an addition to that question from someone else in the audience that's also kind of looking at the formal qualities of your work and the way that you work. They ask, one thing I find particularly appealing about your paintings is the interplay between solid, dense sections and more loose textured ones, which somewhat mirrors how I think humans perceive. They latch on to certain aspects with permanence while other details remain somewhat unresolved. Can I ask why you paint this way? Is the question.
I like to paint things as if I was painting something else. Like if I'm painting like a body, I like to pretend that the body is like a river. Or if I'm painting a face, I want to pretend it's a teacup when I paint it. I think things are more like, I'm not interested in turning paint into people. I'm interested in turning people into paint. Like, I'm not interested in I think that I'm like a very technical painter, and I do have like, strong technique, but I hate seeing paintings that are beholden to the artist's facility. I think that is like the death of the painting, to see technique take over the entire thing. And that's when painting is its most illustrative and boring and dead-endy. No matter what's being depicted, it all boils down to how well it's painted. And for me, that's like a death sentence for the painting. So I'm yeah, that's why things turn into other things in my work, and why failure remains in the painting as part of its process, because it's never really about technique.
Thank you for that answer, and thanks for those questions. I have a question related about color. I love the colors in the paintings, and they really envelop you. They almost feel illuminated from within when you walk into the exhibition space. I'm curious how you choose color and how that comes about in the process of making the work.
Um, I think, I mean, I went to see Julio Torres's thing at Performance Space. It was so brilliant, and he talked about color, and it was actually amazing. Like, as a painter, I was listening to him personify color and talk about the corporate or capitalistic or sinister aspects of color that were hilarious. And um, I think that a lot of the time it has to do with atmosphere for me. And like I said, I don't want to paint emotion, but I am like, I do want an emotional experience to resonate from the painting, and color is an amazing vehicle for that without having to illustrate anything. So, and I'm also like, to be honest, there's so much I don't know about color, and so much I'm still learning about color. And for example, the red painting in the company show, Sacrum, is this luminous red, and I have no idea how I got there. Like, it's on top of, that red painting is on top of a blue painting. Maybe that's how it happened. And I tried to recreate that effect in the red painting in the Hauser exhibition, and it's just not the same. Color is so specific. And but I like for it to be a kind of reactive. I like when I'm looking at a sort of, like, there's an all blue painting in my studio right now, and I look away from it and the room is orange, and I love that color envelops you that way. I want to create a spatial and atmospheric envelope for the viewer and help them live inside the painting for as long as they can.
Thank you, Ambra, for that answer. I have
Mhm.
one last question from Joe Mason, and then we'll turn to the reading. Joe says, "Thank you, and please, can you have a show in London as soon as possible? I'd be interested to know if you consciously sometimes think or feel the need to leaven what may seem dark work with humor, perhaps, or material pleasure or absurdity, for example."
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not here to depress people. People can do that all by themselves. I can do it myself. Um, and to make something that's so dark is also not a kind of accurate reflection of the complexity of reality. Life isn't explicitly dark or explicitly funny. And I feel like having moments in tension with darkness or something disturbing, like a moment of comedic respite or absurdity, is also part of the imaginative freedom of painting. I think that those moments allow somebody to step outside a formula or a prescription in the painting and realize that it's like, they're not just moments of absurdity, it's like a moment of potentiality where, like, this could have been anything. It's kind of like a pleasant reminder of that freedom and possibility.
Thank you so much for that question, Joe. Thank you, everyone, for your questions today. And thank you again, Amber and Ksenia, for the conversation. We're going to close today with a couple of readings, beginning with Ksenia. So I'll pass you the mic.
Thanks so much, Chloe. Yes, so we are going to both read a poem from a collection of poetry by Hilda Hilst, who was a Brazilian poet and novelist. And she wrote this collection of poetry that was actually only translated into English in 2018, and it's titled Of Death. And it basically, the poems treat death as a lover. She's being seduced by death, she's seducing death, and I found that these poems really resonated with Ambra's work. So I will read my favorite first. It's numbered 9. And it particularly the mural at Company Gallery with the skeleton, the skull on the horse, made me think of this poem. Your hooves bandaged, so I won't hear your heart trot. Is this, little mare, how you'll come for me? Or because I thought you severe and silent, you'll come as a child on a shard of china? Lover, because I disdained you? Or with the airs of a king, because I made you queen? That's it.
Okay, and I'll read mine, which is 25. Where were you born, death? What colors? Sundown, mountain. And the pulses that tore you off from what's darkest. From flesh? Did you feed on black almonds? Was there water? Wailing, crying, with a call, the way life is born? If you wanted to, did you touch? And being a child, didn't you touch everything? And the instants became insipid and nothing. And ancient now, knowing every touch, agony, horror, and awe, satiated. Why don't you leave?
Wow, those are amazing. Thank you so much for reading those to close us out. Thank you again so much for your conversation today. And a special shout out to the team at Company and the team at Hauser and Wirth for providing all those beautiful images that we were looking at, especially Sasha and Christine. I'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art and Tiger Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, where you'll be able to watch this shortly on YouTube. The Rail has been free and independent for 25 years. A donation directly supports our writers, our staff, and our operations. You can support our work at the link in the chat. And if you're free on Monday, join us for a special virtual screening of Lakota Nation versus United States. And as is Rail tradition, you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for joining us today. And please join me in thanking Ambera and Ksenia.
Thank you, Chloe.
Congrats.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Ambera.
that
Thank
ruled.
you,
So
Ambera.
good.
Bye, Charlie.
Thank you so
So
much.
much. Thank you so
Amazing.
much. Thanks,
Congratulations.
Natalie.
Thank you, Ksenia.
Oh, thank you, Fong.
Hi.
Hi, oh, there you are. Nice to see you.
Congratulations. Go see the show, everybody.
Go see the shows. Go see the shows. Walking
Go see the
distance.
show.
Walking distance. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye, chicken.
Oh, it is a dog.
Good job, Ambra. Good job, Ksenia. That was amazing,
Thank
you
you.
guys. Thank you,
Thank you so
Chloe.
much.
Thank
Bye,
you
everybody.
all.
Take care.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.